This all went down just a few weeks back. I'm a high school senior and I've spent my entire life in Arizona. There isn't a ton to do out here, but my friends and I got into exploring forgotten places. We sought out abandoned factories, old storm drains, dead shopping centers, anything that felt left behind by time. We'd squeeze through gaps in fences, snap photos, and sometimes venture onto rooftops or into flooded basements. It was never about vandalism or anything destructive. It was about the atmosphere. The one who always found the most obscure spots was Leo. He was the quiet, almost brooding one in our group. He'd just show up with coordinates to places none of us had ever heard of. Most of the time, I didn't even bother asking how he found them. One afternoon, he messaged our group chat with a screenshot from some obscure online forum. It was a low-traffic site with blurry pictures and cryptic comments. The post in question had a caption that said something like, "Countless abandoned mine shafts in the Sonoran Desert, if you know where to look." Apparently, Leo had been messaging the original poster, who gave him a few general areas to investigate. That was all it took. Leo became obsessed. So, that Saturday, it was me, Leo, and our other friend, Marcus. I have a Wrangler that's built for desert trails, so we took my Jeep. We didn't have an address, just a general zone and a pin dropped somewhere in the vastness of the Sonoran. The spot Leo had marked was deep in the desert, miles from any sign of civilization. We'd left the paved road nearly 30 minutes ago, and the dirt track we were on was barely a path anymore. We drove for what felt like an eternity. No signs, no buildings, no landmarks, just a sea of sand and scrub. I kept checking my phone, knowing full well we had no service. In the back, Marcus was getting increasingly agitated. He started going off on Leo, saying the whole thing was a bust and that he'd been duped by some internet troll. Leo, ever stubborn when it came to his navigation, insisted we press on. I figured I'd give him a little more time. Just as we were about to throw in the towel, Marcus pointed to something off to our right. At first, it looked like another rock formation, but as we got closer, we saw it. A splintered, half-swallowed wooden frame built into a hillside. Part of the entrance was caved in, but a dark void was visible behind the support beams. It wasn't massive, but it was unmistakably a man-made mine shaft. Leo didn't say a word at first. He just pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he'd saved, and dropped a pin on our location. Then he turned to Marcus and smirked. "Told you." Marcus grumbled that he just got lucky, but I had to admit, it was impressive. We'd been driving in circles in the middle of nowhere and actually found one. Parked a few dozen feet from the entrance on a flat patch of ground, we all got out and grabbed our gear. Leo had even brought face masks for the dust. The three of us walked up to the mine, and it looked even more dilapidated up close. Leo picked up a rock and tossed it into the darkness. We waited. A few seconds later, we heard a clang, 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 and then silence. It was deep. "If we trip going down," Leo said, looking back at us, "we're probably not coming back up." We began our descent. Thankfully, the shaft wasn't a vertical drop. It sloped down at a sharp angle, but it was still walkable. The ground was loose, and old wooden beams lined the walls. To my surprise, they felt reasonably solid. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The silence was absolute. We couldn't even see the daylight from the entrance anymore. Eventually, we reached what felt like the bottom. The shaft leveled out into a wider tunnel that branched off in several directions. It was exactly what you'd picture. Support beams every few yards, rusted rails half buried in the dirt, and a thick coat of dust on everything. Scraps of wood and metal were scattered about, remnants of old carts or tools. The air smelled stale and metallic, and I was grateful for the mask. We picked a tunnel and started walking, our flashlight beams cutting through the blackness. None of us spoke. We weren't searching for anything in particular, just exploring. There wasn't much to see. The place looked like it had been stripped of anything valuable long ago. But then, we heard it. It was faint, coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. It sounded like something being dragged. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw Leo had stopped too. Marcus gestured for us to kill our lights, so we did. We stood there in total oppressive darkness, listening. The sound came again, a rough, scraping noise, like stone or wood being pulled across the rocky floor. The echo made it hard to pinpoint, but it was getting closer. We stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. The scraping continued, slow, steady, and growing louder. It still sounded distant, but that didn't make it any less unnerving. Then, Marcus fumbled with his flashlight, accidentally clicking it on and off in a brief, blinding flash. I wanted to strangle him. The scraping stopped. The mine fell silent. Then, from the depths of the tunnel, a loud, metallic clang echoed toward us, as if whatever was being dragged had been dropped. Immediately after, the most horrifying, demonic scream I have ever heard ripped through the air. It was barely human. We turned and bolted, not caring how much noise we made. I have never run that fast in my life. I could hear something scrambling behind me, and I felt a wave of pure panic wash over me. I was at the back of the group, struggling to keep up, when my foot caught on something. I stumbled, and my shoe was ripped from my foot. I didn't have time to go back for it. I just kept running, ignoring the jagged ground. Up ahead, Leo and Marcus were already at the incline, scrambling up toward the light. I practically launched myself up the slope. Climbing out of there, half barefoot, was excruciating. It felt like I was collecting a new splinter with every step. If it wasn't for the adrenaline, I don't think I would have made it. By the time I collapsed into the open air, my foot was destroyed. Leo and Marcus had to practically carry me to the Jeep. I couldn't drive, so Marcus jumped behind the wheel. I had barely slammed the door shut before he threw the Jeep in gear and stomped on the gas. I don't think we were followed out, but we weren't waiting around to find out. We drove in complete silence to the nearest hospital. The pain was so intense I thought I was going to pass out. I ended up with a tetanus shot, and even after they cleaned the wounds and pulled out all the splinters, I couldn't walk right for days. A few days later, once I could get around without a severe limp, Marcus told us he thought he'd dropped his wallet near the mine entrance, probably while helping me to the Jeep. He hadn't mentioned it at the time, but now he figured it was worth driving back, just to the entrance. There was no way we were going back inside. So the three of us drove back out, using the pin Leo had saved. Of course, his wallet was nowhere to be found. But we did find something else. My shoe. It was sitting a few feet from the mine's entrance. I walked over cautiously and picked it up. It was mauled, as if something had savagely chewed on it. There were distinct teeth marks pressed into the rubber sole, and entire chunks of the fabric were torn away. We left immediately after that. None of us have a rational explanation. You might say it was just a vagrant living down there, but if that's the case, how were they surviving? There was no food, no water. What in God's name were they eating? Leo said the forum user never replied to his messages asking what happened. It's going to be a long, long time before I go exploring in the desert again. Story 2. The Fire. I've always been an outdoorsy type. For me, a vacation is a camping or fishing trip, not some fancy stay at a resort. My girlfriend of 6 months, Maya, feels the same way about nature, which is probably a big reason we hit it off. A couple of weeks ago, Maya and I decided to try something different. We drove out to the Anza Borrego Desert to camp for a few days. We'd both done forests, mountains, and lakes, but neither of us had ever really experienced the kind of vast, silent isolation the desert offers. It felt like something we had to do at least once. One of the main draws was the stargazing. That's something we both adore. Even when we first started dating, we'd drive out of town just to lie on the hood of my truck and watch the cosmos. When we read that this particular area was far from any light pollution, we were sold. I found a spot online that was supposed to be remote but legal to camp on. No amenities, just open land, some old fire rings, and a universe of stars. It sounded perfect. We packed the truck and made the 3-hour drive early that Friday morning. The last hour was on a dirt road that seemed to stretch into infinity. There wasn't a house or another person in sight, which was exactly the point. By the time we found the campsite, it was late afternoon. The place was completely empty, just as we'd hoped. The first 2 nights were everything we wanted. Warm days, cool nights, and perfectly clear skies. We'd sit by the fire with a couple of beers, share a joint, and talk about nothing important, or just lean back and get lost in the stars. It was so refreshing to be disconnected with no schedule or distractions. And yeah, we'd fool around in the tent. That was part of the fun too. Both nights, though, we heard something strange. It wasn't close, just a sound carrying across the vast distance. It was a low, mournful cry, like a howl or a moan. It didn't sound human, it sounded animalistic. The first night we both paused when we heard it. Maya gave me a look that said, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, but we laughed it off. I chalked it up to a coyote or maybe a mountain lion, and she agreed. The same thing happened the second night, around the same time. We just assumed it was desert wildlife. It was a little unsettling, sure, but we weren't going to let it spoil our trip. On the third night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. It was quiet at first, just a few faint crunches of someone walking slowly on the dry earth. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't an animal. The rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. I lay there, completely still. I wanted to grab my flashlight, wake Maya, do something, but I was paralyzed. My heart hammered against my ribs, and every muscle was locked in place. The footsteps didn't circle the tent. They just stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, there was only silence. I stared at the dark fabric above me, barely blinking, waiting for another sound. But whoever, or whatever, it was, remained perfectly still. I waited for what felt like an hour, praying they would just walk away. Then, I heard a sharp, unmistakable flick, the sound of a lighter. A small orange glow appeared through the wall of the tent, about waist high and a few feet to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady for a few seconds, then began to wave it slowly back and forth. I didn't move. I just watched it, trying not to breathe. And then the flame grew. It exploded from a flicker to a bright, menacing glow, like they had lit a torch. Without warning, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the dirt with a soft thud, and a second later, the side of our tent erupted in light. The heat was instantaneous, far faster than I could have imagined. Within seconds, the fire was spreading across the nylon. That's what finally broke my paralysis. I shook May awake, and she instantly understood what was happening. We scrambled, no time to think. We started heaving our sleeping bags, our clothes, anything we could grab, out the other side of the tent and onto the dirt. I'm not even sure we got everything. We dove out of the tent as the flames climbed higher. Maya grabbed one of our water jugs and dumped it on the fire, while I stomped on the burning patches that had caught on the ground. Eventually, we got it under control. Half the tent was a melted, blackened mess. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the area around our campsite, searching for the person who had just tried to set us on fire. But there was no one. At least, no one I could see. Maya was already packing our remaining gear, and I rushed to help. We started power walking in what we hoped was the direction of the truck. There were no landmarks in the pitch black, and we were essentially guessing. After a few minutes, it was clear we were disoriented. Maybe 10 minutes into our frantic search, I heard it again. That same distant cry from the first 2 nights. Only this time, it didn't stop. It was a continuous scream, like an animal in agony. And then another scream joined in from a different direction, and another. They were all coming from behind us, and it was more than one of them out there. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her along faster. By some miracle, we found the truck. We threw our stuff in the back, and I peeled out as fast as I dared. The road was treacherous, and with only my high beams to cut through the darkness, every dip and turn felt like it could send us flipping. After what felt like an eternity, we finally hit a paved road. I didn't slow down until I saw the headlights of other cars. Maya was holding it together, but I could tell she was on the verge of breaking down, and I was doing a terrible job of comforting her. We called the police and reported everything. All I can think about now is that if I weren't such a light sleeper, my girlfriend and I could have been murdered that night, burned alive in the middle of the desert. Story 3. The tax. This is important context, so I have to start here. I've always been a little suspicious of my mom's past. Suspicious isn't quite the right word. It's more like I'm aware of a carefully curated blank slate where her history should be. She was born in Mexico and spent her childhood there before coming to the US alone for college. The rest is the story I know. She got a job, met my dad, and built her life in America. I know very little about her life before she came here, and a part of me believes that's intentional. She deflects any questions about her past, usually with a joke or a quick change of subject. Growing up, my dad explained that she'd experienced some childhood trauma that was best left alone. I accepted that for years. Why wouldn't I? But as I got older, my curiosity grew, and I started to notice just how masterfully she could sidestep those questions at family holidays. Here's what I do know. She grew up in a border town in Sonora, somewhere along the Arizona border. It's a place with a reputation. The closest I've ever come to learning about her parents is from a dark joke she used to tell when I was a kid. She'd laugh and say her father's side of the family were the politicians, and her mother's side were the crooks, but she could never tell them apart. I always took it as a cynical political jab. But as I've gotten older, I've wondered if there was more truth to it than I realized. Her dad worked for the government in some capacity. She has never, not once, spoken about her mother. The only other piece of the puzzle is a name. I won't write it out, so I'll just call him Jay. One night, when I was about 10, I woke up to use the bathroom. As I passed the living room, I heard my mom speaking softly on the phone. I didn't understand Spanish, but she repeated Jay's name several times, the way you would when talking about someone, not to them. The room was dark, so I couldn't see her, but I could hear her voice clearly. Even though I knew it was my mom, the darkness freaked me out, and I instinctively flipped on the light switch. She didn't jump or scream. It was as if she was expecting me. She immediately hung up the phone and fixed me with a cold, hard glare I had never seen before. She told me to go back to bed. I did. And that's it. That's the sum of my knowledge of my mother's past. A joke, a vague occupation, and the name Jay. What I'm about to tell you happened almost exactly a year ago, and it's been weighing on me heavily. I'm from New Mexico, born and raised. I was a year out of college and driving through the desert to meet up with an old friend. It was a long, monotonous drive, and I was tired of my music. I'm not a podcast person, so I was just cycling through my contacts, calling friends and whoever I was talking to at the time. Eventually, I called my mom. We're both huge soccer fans, so we got deep into a conversation about the upcoming Champions League games. She knows the sport inside and out, and we can talk about it for hours. Out of nowhere, I saw 2 pickup trucks blocking the road ahead. It didn't look like an accident, so I wasn't sure what was going on. Worried someone might need help, I slowed down as I approached. My mom was still on the phone, connected to my car's Bluetooth, but I hadn't told her what was happening. I stopped my car and sat there, debating whether to get out. Before I could decide, 3 men jumped out of the trucks, all of them holding guns. I froze. At the same time, I saw another car pull up quickly behind me, boxing me in. I was unarmed. Compliance was my only option. One of the men tapped his gun against my driver's side window, motioning for me to get out. The other 2 stood back, watching. I put my hands up and slowly exited my car. The man barked commands at me in Spanish, but I couldn't understand him. My inability to speak Spanish is one of my biggest regrets, especially as a Mexican American, and in that moment, I felt a profound, helpless shame. It didn't take a translator to understand what they wanted, though. In a matter of seconds, my phone, keys, wallet, and watch were in their possession. It looked like I was about to be stranded in the desert. one of the men got into my truck, and that's when everything changed. I realized I hadn't ended the call with my mom. Since my truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through my window as the man reached for the infotainment screen to hang up, but then he pulled his hand back. He seemed to pause, then tilt his head, listening. I instantly put it together. My mom must have been speaking to him. I saw his lips start to move, and I realized they were having a full conversation. I couldn't hear a word through the closed windows, but I knew they were speaking Spanish. I would swear on my life that I saw him repeat the name Jay a few times, as if he was confirming it with her. At some point, the other two men realized what was happening and walked over to the truck. The man inside rolled down the window and spoke to them, glancing over at me as he did. After a short exchange, all three of them turned and stared at me, sizing me up. The conversation didn't last much longer. They hung up the phone and walked back over to me. They handed me all of my things back, my phone, my watch, my car keys. The only thing they kept was the cash from my wallet. One of the men looked me in the eye, smiled, and said in a thick accent, "A small tax." I have never been so happy to lose $100 in my life. As I drove away, all three of their vehicles, including the one that had blocked me from behind, peeled off the road and sped out into the open desert. I tried to memorize their license plates, but none of the trucks had any. I was in shock. After a few minutes of driving, I called my mother back and demanded to know what happened. She claimed she had just threatened to call the police, telling them she was tracking my location. I told her that was obviously a lie and insisted she tell me what they really talked about. But she stuck to her story, saying most of the Spanish was just her pleading with them. Even though I knew she wasn't telling the truth, there was nothing I could do but let it go. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. We ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in silence. For a long time, I tried to block the experience out of my mind. But lately, I can't. I'm becoming more and more convinced that my mom had some deep connection to a cartel growing up, and worse, that the connection never ended when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not an idiot, so I don't know how much longer she thinks she can keep this up. I feel like I should just ask her directly, but I'm terrified of the tension it would create between, or worse, what kind of world I might be inviting into my own life if she finally decides to tell me the truth.